Okay, let's set up our view of our curves, our display of our curves. So I'm back at the horses. I'm going to click the black-white adjustment layer icon and tell it to add a curves. Now we've got curves. I have the properties tab or window open. If you're ever missing this, you can get to it by going to Window, Properties. You can pop that right open, no big deal. I'm going to control what this displays. I'm going to do that under Curves Display Options. That's just in the flyout menu, Curves Display Options. So right now, since I was goofing around with this before I recorded this video, everything's unchecked. So what are all these things? What's this thing? What's that? What's all happening? Well, let's turn it all off for a second. And you can see with it's all off, it's actually hard to tell what's going on and what you're doing. It's really difficult. If you did a change on the green and you came back over here, you couldn't see what's happening. It's confusion. So first off, under the flyout menu, Curves Display Options, the very first one is the channel overlay. If you click that box and you have changes in one of the color channels, it will show up on the composite, the RGB channel. So you can see I did a green adjustment just a minute ago, so we can see on the RGB that the green's on. So totally want that on. We're going to go to Curves Display Options again. Histogram is the histogram in the background, and that gets cached and recalculated if you click that button. Absolutely you want that on. So that's all great, but we need those crosshairs and things back. So if we go to the Curves Display Options, oh, look at that. We've got something called an intersection line, and those are the crosshairs. And last but not least, we have the baseline. And with the baseline, this little, can you even see it? This line right here, it is so small. Let me come back over here. This line right here, it's just a little diagonal line, and it lets you know whether or not you're on the edge. And so you totally want to have that up. All right, so those are your options, but there are a couple more on here that I should explain. You have the grids, and you want really this one rather than that one. This is at 25% marks because it's cut into quarters. That means 25%. There are 10 of these, so these are 10% marks. It's much easier to tell what you're doing. Totally want that available to you. If you were to break this off, come on. Sometimes I have to pick a different tool just so I can get the diagonal. You'll notice that you can't really increase the size of your display. Unfortunately, even in the more current versions, the Curves Display Options doesn't give you a way to make it any bigger. Bad news about that, sorry. It would be really cool if you could make it bigger, so if anyone from Adobe happens to stumble across this video, please let us make that view bigger. We'd love it. And now it's stuck. Oh... There. Oh, there. Okay, well, close enough. We'll just leave it broken off for the moment. All right. Oh, actually, that's a good thing. We can move this over and you can see the whole flyout. Nope, still can't. Okay. Well, such is life. So the last piece is, what is this? Show amount of light or pigment. Notice that light has 0 to 255. Well, we know what that means. That means that it's from, on the 8-bit color mode, 0 being black, 255 meaning white. So pigment or ink is for the CMYK, and check this out as I flip it, everything goes the opposite direction. So in light versus ink, in the ink, moving, come on green, let's clear this out. I'm just gonna reset the whole thing, go to RGB. So if we move stuff up in ink, it's getting darker, which makes sense, we're adding more pigment. Notice if we draw a line up from the bottom and then to the left, sure enough, stuff is going to a darker range. Darker tonal range. Drag stuff down, becomes lighter because presumably with white paper, if you add less ink, it is lighter. That's the whole mystery on that. Honestly, I can't recall ever having to do that. I think I've always left it on light and it's worked perfectly fine. So there are a couple of other strange display options here. Notice that we have show clipping for black-white points. Now if we move it, it's all white on the bottom and then it does weird things. And then on the white, if we move it in, it does weird things. Well, wait, if we grab this point, it's the same thing, right? No. Okay, so here's the secret to this, the whole mystery. Let me make this a little bigger so we can see the input and the output. With the show clipping for black-white points on, It means that as you move these black-white points, not the curved points associated with the black-white points, confusing, yes, I know. If you move these, it will show you whether anything is being brought past the point of visible data. So in other words, remember how if we move on same deal back when we were using the levels, if we moved that arrow key while holding down the Alt, we get strange happenings. Well, see how I'm cutting in right now onto the histogram? How this bar now brings everything to black? Well, what exactly is going to black in that area? It just hits this bar and then slides left. It's on the darkest part of the area. Well, what's going on can be seen by dragging this. Now with the show clipping for black-white points on, moving the black point will show what's being pushed to black so it's lost. So in other words, down here, the first thing to go is some blues. And then we get the magenta, so that's the opposite of green in there. And we get some yellows, which I think is blue and red. So sure enough, red is up next. If you get confused, just Google an additive color wheel and you'll be able to see it. Or remember back in like class week 1 and week 2, we did the RGB channels and we did big white dots on black backgrounds to see it. That's the same thing as the color wheel. Anyway, we're losing data, and this is the data we're losing. So we're getting dollar stuff. Now, if we start on the white, it's kind of doing the opposite. We have this black, but as we drag in, things slowly get pushed to white. So eventually everything is deleted. And sure enough, it's starting on the blue channels again. Notice the sky gets really washed out. And then it kind of gets, and eventually it's brought entirely to white. So we, in fact, don't see anything over there. Opposite is true with black. Things eventually go to black. We drag them all the way over. So that's super useful, right? Sort of. Now we can't see what we're doing. So what you really want to do is this. Leave the show clipping for black and white points unchecked. And then, just like you could with levels, hold down the Alt key. That's Option if you're on a Macintosh. And it will toggle between it. So you can see what you're doing to the image, and then you can check what data is disappearing. And if you click the Alt key, nothing happens, or you release the Alt key, nothing happens, just wiggle the mouse a little bit, and it will refresh your screen. Same with white point, no Alt key, Alt key. So that means we can make decisions like, oh, I'm losing some blue in that chunk. Is that important? Yeah, that's the sky. It's mostly blue. So if you're clipping to white on that blue data is pretty much all the data there is. And so you're just getting this awful bloom effect and everything's disappearing. How about on the black? No, not really. I mean, we're losing a little bit of blue and magenta. I think we can live with that. And so we get this greater contrast. So quick heads up on that. By bringing these points in, by making this line steeper, we're getting starker contrast, and that makes sense. I mean, look at this. Suddenly black is black for much further distance. That's confusing. These dark grays are now black. These light grays are now white, and this angle is very steep. So if we go up, say over here, we can see that things, the darks are getting darker, but the lights are getting lighter. I believe that is correct. Yes, it is. And it's just pivoting on the edge. And so that has increased contrast, but at the cost of data that we may have liked. Sometimes you'll want to lose data and just have like a high contrast image, and sometimes you won't, but you do need to know what's going on with that. So heads up on that too. You can flip these points all the way around, just like you could on the levels adjustment, but not the same way. So remember on levels, we had that black and white bar at the bottom, and that would let us flip it entirely. So just to demonstrate, image adjust, click on the background layer, not double click on the background layer, image adjustments, levels. Remember this bar on the bottom? We can flip it. We get this weird negative land. Well, let me cancel that. We can do the same thing over here. So I'm just going to, instead of grabbing these, which will not flip because the black and white points won't do it, I'm going to grab the curves here. And notice that I still can't flip it. So what am I talking about? How do you do it? Well, like this. We've got another dimension to play with. Bring the black all the way to the top. Now we get this white. Bring the white all the way to the bottom. And voila, it's the inversion effect. Pretty cool, right? Well, this is like if you've done photography before it was digital photography, this is like a color negative. But what if what if we wanted the colors left alone? What if we wanted the sky to be blue instead of orange and the orange horses to still be orange instead of blue? Well, we can do that with our mode. So the blending mode can be applied not just to layers, but also to adjustment layers. So way down here, we can see that we have some strange going-ons. And what these things are the parts of color. So hue and saturation make color, so we can flip color around. And luminosity is just the luminosity, how white or black something is. So by choosing luminosity as our blend mode, this inversion isn't being applied to colors. So we still have all the blues and oranges. We just have this strange ethereal effect occurring on our black and white. Suddenly dark's light and light's dark. It's like some kind of bizarro flash has gone off in the middle of the night. It's a really strange and interesting effect. You could also just apply it to color. And so you still have the daytime effect, but it looks like some kind of science fiction cover from an early 40s sci-fi novel. And so you just get some strange effects that way. So in other words, the reason I showed you this was, remember, you can change these to luminosity or color. And this is important if you're not doing crazy inversions. Let me put this back. But if you're doing like crazy adjustments, if you don't want the color to be affected while you're doing this stuff, you can set this to luminosity and we'll leave the colors alone. And so you can end up getting really crazy effects that you may or may not want. And we'll talk about what's happening here in a minute. Or you can leave the luminosity alone and just have the colors go completely haywire. And that could be a lot of fun too. And again, we'll talk about what's happening in just a second. And in fact, let's go over how the curves points work and the pencil tool, and that will let us talk about this weird posterization effect that's occurring. And before we start the next video, I'm going to see if I can redock this. Okay, I'll see you in a minute.